What's up, gamers? It's Ed Park, aka Taugrim. Today is Saturday, August the 4th, and you are watching TaugVlog episode 3. Today I'm going to talk about my top 5 biggest design flaws for the player versus player or PvP combat in MMORPGs. So I'm going to start at 5 and count it back down to 1. The number 5 biggest design flaw is to have 50% healing debuffs. What happens when you have 50% healing debuff is when you have the healing debuff around, it makes healing stupidly hard, but then when you don't have the healing around, it makes healing stupidly easy. Now, if you played World of Warcraft between the Burning Crusade through Wrath of the Lich King, you'll know that for over 3.5 years there was one particular debuff for one spec tree for one class that heavily influenced the way 5v5 arena and 3v3 arena especially were played, and that was the Mortal Strike debuff. It was a 50% uncleansable single target debuff that an arms warrior could keep chained on a single target. And the issue with this again is that when the healing debuff was around, it made healing very difficult. And if your side had a Mortal Strike warrior, you could essentially make the other side's healer burn through their mana twice as fast trying to keep targets alive. And I think having things like this, having particular debuffs like this that are that strong are bad because it limits players' choice as far as class comp and spec variety. And it also makes for, like I said, really imbalanced gameplay. So Blizzard eventually realized this, and when they got to Cataclysm, what they did is they nerfed all the healing debuffs to a fraction of what they used to be, and correspondingly they nerfed healing and healing regen to keep it balanced. And keeping those things down, toned down, created a much better gameplay experience. I played Arena in the 2v2 and 3v3 brackets at a 2K rating and higher with my Prot Pally and a friend of mine who played Enhancement Shaman, and what I saw in Cataclysm was the greatest diversity of comps in the 2K rating and above in those brackets than at any point in time prior to Cataclysm. Now, I will talk about this later because while Blizzard realized the issue with having a 50% healing debuff, other games that followed, such as Rift, actually took 50% healing debuffs and made the situation worse, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. Number 4, the fourth biggest design flaw that game makers create in PvP is to have an asymmetrical damage mechanic. So, what is that? If any of you played Warhammer Online, just think for yourselves right now, what was the single biggest class that provided balance issues? Now, I know what it is, I know what you're going to say, or I know what most you're going to say. It was the Bright Wizard class, right? How did the Bright Wizard work? Well, the Bright Wizard had a class mechanic called Combustion. It was a meter that scaled from 0 to 100. The higher that meter went, the higher the crit chance for the Bright Wizard and the higher their crit damage. So as they cast spells, as they built up their combustion, they were capable of putting out much more burst, heavier spike over time. And the thing is, you wonder, okay, so how was that mechanic balanced? Well, there's a thing called backlash. And as you ramped up your combustion meter to 100, you increased the chance that when you cast a spell that you were going to take some backlash damage, i.e. you were going to blow up. Right? But the thing about this backlash damage, at level 40, at level cap, at 100 combustion, the backlash damage was a fixed static amount, 750 points of damage, right? Whereas the benefits that you got from combustion scaled with your gear. So what would happen over time is your benefit from combustion would keep scaling, like this, whereas the backlash damage was always the same. Even if you got, awesome epic face roll gear, the benefit scaled, the downside did not. And moreover, if a Bright Wizard casts AoE abilities that hit multiple targets, the benefits from Combustion apply to each one of those targets. They had a higher chance to crit each one of the people that they just AoE'd, spike them for more damage, and despite it being an AoE cast, it was still counted as one cast for the backlash calculation. So, okay, maybe I blow myself up for 750 points of damage, but I just own face on all of you guys, right? And moreover, if you take a few Bright Wizards or people and you stack them in the same area, what you get are area wipes, right? And it was pretty face roll, it was pretty dumb. Mythic tried some things like to say, well, we can only hit so many targets, and that helped sort of, but it never took away the dominance that Bright Wizards and their mirror class sorcerers had in PvP because the mechanics scaled too well. So that's the fourth biggest design flaw, an asymmetrical damage mechanic. The third biggest design flaw is an asymmetrical crowd control mechanic. So there are two different ways in which this gets implemented. So one is I can CC the heck out of you while I kill you, and there's really not much you can do. So that's like, like stun locking with rogues. Or there's the chicken with the head cut off, which is, like a warlock, fear bombing you, having you run around, you can't do anything while they burn you down with dots. So games have tried various things to address this. They try to add, trinkets into the games. They try to have diminishing returns. But the bottom line is to have an experience where one player can lock down the other player unless they choose long-term emergency cooldowns. It's just poor face roll PvP design. It creates a bad experience. That's one way in which the asymmetrical crowd control mechanic gets implemented. The other way is when you can't CC me, but I can CC you. So I've got awesome CC defense, and there's nothing you can do about it to control me. The best example of this was the Pyro Mage in Rift. When I read the tooltip for this, I thought I must have been reading it wrong. There was a 44-point base ability called Ground of Strength for Pyro Mages, where you could put this little circle in the ground. As long as you stood inside of it, you were immune to CC. So, when I first saw the tooltip, I was like, that must be an error. I mean, there must be some duration on this or some downside. Well, actually, no. When you stand inside the circle, it actually provides you some additional buffs, right? And then I remember debating this with people, who would be like, well, it's not such a big deal. You just need to kill the Bright Wizard. I was like, kill the Pyro Mage, right? I don't have anything against Fire Mages, by the way. Just I played that archetype across games. I was a Bright Wizard in Warhammer for 6 weeks until I switched from that face roll class over to Sword Master. That's a whole different story. But the Pyro Mage drops their Ground of Strength. People are like, well, you just need to kill the Pyro Mage. Well, okay, let's think about this for a second. Okay, so the Pyro Mage has a range of 30 meters, which is pretty far. They have high burst and sustained damage, and they have crowd control. So if I am theoretically a melee trying to kill the Pyro Mage, I have to eat damage for the first 30 meters while I get into melee range, and I can't crowd control them. I can't knock them back out of the Ground of Strength. I can't stun them, silence them, all the things that I would normally do to try to counter an opponent. I can't do anything. In these war fronts, what you would have is like 2 or 3 Pyro Mages setting up shop with their turrets, having one healer back them, and they would just sit there and proceed to blow everyone else up to bits. It was a terrible experience, and one of the guys from Tron even called patch 1.1 the dawn of the Pyromancer. Like I said, I still have trouble understanding how anyone with a reasonable common sense could design something on paper that when you actually think about the implications for PvP, it would create a face roll advantage, right? Okay, so that's design flaw number 3, having asymmetrical CC. Either you can do too much of it to somebody else or you're immune to it. They both create really lame gameplay, non-skill based play. Okay, so that brings us to number 2, only 2 more to go. The second biggest design flaw that I've seen in PvP is to create passive procs that have too strong of an effect, as opposed to tying meaningful effects to abilities with cooldowns that have an extended window. Okay, so the example of this again comes from Rift, and you remember I talked about the number 5 design flaw was 50% healing debuffs. Well, Rift took that design flaw and expanded upon it in a way which was just crazy, right? So with the warrior class in Rift, you could spec into a tree, the champion tree, and I think it was 17 points in or 18 points in. You could get a talent that would make, whenever you crit a target, whether it was a single target attack or AoE, you would apply a 50%, 15-second uncleansable healing debuff on that target. So what you would see warriors do is they would just, roll into combat, drop a few AoEs, heal debuff everyone around them, right? Especially if you just stack sufficient crit, you get a lot of crits, and then healing will become really hard. And of course, the implication of this is it's going to create a situation where healers need to be strong, and people complain like nonstop ever since the game came out that healers are overpowered in PvP. And part of the problem was, well, if you don't make healers strong, then the 50% healing debuff is going to wreck everybody, right? And what Dryon should have done is they should have done what Rift did, which is to lower the effectiveness of healing debuffs in PvP, lower, correspondingly healing, so that those two stayed in sync and aligned and balanced. But they never meaningfully did this. And it gets even worse than this, right? When patch 1.5 came around, what Dryon did is added a bunch of healing debuffs. Well, let me say, they changed the mechanics for some of the healing debuffs so that the rogues became a second class with a 50% healing debuff. And this is my favorite example to give, right? To make rogues easier to play, they increased the endurance regen, which I thought was a fair thing to do. And if you played a marksman rogue, that was the range DPS version. what you could effectively do from 35 meters out, so it was the longest range in the game, you could spam one ability, right, fan out. It would hit up to 8 targets. Each target it hit per cast, it had a 20% chance to apply a 50% 15-second healing debuff. And granted, that was cleansable, but remember, rogues in that game had a 1-second global cooldown. They could spam this ability forever and basically keep people chain debuffed. And most of the healing classes, if they wanted to remove a debuff, they had to spend a GCD to do it. So this is the problem, because it was a passive proc, the healing debuff. The rogue just sits there and just spams fan out 35 meters away, smacking up to 8 people in the face, healing debuff them without having to do anything else. They just sit there and push a button. And there's a hilarious video I'm going to link, up here. This picture, this one rogue created a video where he created a large macro button that said "I win," and he just hit that one key the entire game. It was fan out, right? He finished tops in damage, tops in killing blows, and it was like a totally base roll style of play. But this was the problem: is what Rift did is they took a bunch of very powerful passive procs, made them apply to multiple classes in ways that were incredibly easy to apply, and then it became a face roll experience where there was no skill involved. You just hit your abilities, or you just sit here and you spam fan out, and you debuff the heck out of everyone. Oh, and I forgot the icing on the cake. So not only could the rogue sit there and spam fan out from 35 meters away forever, hit up to 8 targets, do damage, healing debuff them by 50%, it would also healing siphon the healing that those debuff people were received, so that the rogue, the caster, would be sucking off some of the healing coming into them. And the people try to defend this on the forums. This was the most hilarious thing, and I learned my lesson by this, by the way. I tried to objectively argue that these were bad mechanics, and I got flamed as they labeled trolled as being a rogue hater and all this stuff. And so you guys understand, like, I have actually advocated nerfs and balance changes to classes that I played across games, which causes me to get trolled by a whole different group of people like, you jackass, like, you play our class, don't get us nerfed. But anyway, I genuinely believe in good class balance, because it's not just the best thing for me or other people I play with, it's the healthiest thing for a game. But anyway, this number 2 issue I talked about, this assigning over powerful passive procs to abilities, it's a poor design decision. If you're going to make meaningful debuffs, crowd control abilities, counters, etc., work well in a game, they have to have an associated cooldown. Otherwise, you're just going to create a face roll skillless experience, right? Okay, so this all brings me down to the numero uno biggest design flaw that developers have implemented. And this one really takes the cake in my mind, because it's been proving it doesn't work over and over again. It's the 2-faction world PvP system, right? So what's the problem with the 2-faction system? Well, if you don't put any measures in place to limit populations on one side or the other, what happens is, if you get even a minor statistical advantage, let's say 55% for one side, 45%, or 60-40, a 3-to-2 advantage, what happens in general is you create a virtuous cycle for the side that has the higher pop and a vicious cycle for the side with the lower pop. What do I mean by this? Well, in large-scale world PvP battles, the outcomes are heavily influenced by the number of people who show up, right? So if there's one side with a population advantage consistently, and they end up winning more fights, and they end up winning more PvP rewards or currency, and they end up getting stronger, that makes it easier for them to continue to beat up the weaker side. And what ends up happening, you see on world chat or region chat or whatever, the people on the losing side start complaining, getting frustrated about getting rolled by the Zerg, and those people either stop PvPing or they'll re-roll to the stronger side, right? And so there are a lot of ways you could try to address this with the 2-faction system. The problem is none of the solutions elegantly work. So for example, you could try putting in a population cap, so each side only has a limited number of players who can create characters on that faction. Obviously that has issues, because then they'll run out of slots and people won't be able to play with the people they want to play with. You could try to instance or control the number of players in a given zone, but then it doesn't really feel like world PvP anymore. It feels like large-scale instance PvP. That doesn't help. You could try to provide some sort of bolster mechanic for the outnumbered side. And I know that this wasn't world PvP per se, but Blizzard tried to do this in Winter Grasp with their bolster mechanics, so that the outnumbered side, that they'd have a stronger buff, but in my experience, it didn't meaningfully help the side that was losing. I played on different factions in the same battle group on different servers, and I saw the same behavior every time. The side that was stronger, typically Horde, would beat the crap out of Alliance, even though the Alliance people who showed up were outnumbered, got that, that bolster mechanic. Didn't matter, because they were just getting outgunned. They couldn't cover as many nodes and get all the, siege vehicles going, all that kind of stuff, right? So the Horde side would typically win, which means they'd get access to the Vault raid instance, which means they get access to PvP gear, which means they would get stronger comparatively to the Alliance side. The only system that I have heard really meaningfully works as far as having two-faction world PvP is to not implement two-faction world PvP. Implement three-faction PvP, which Daok did, Dark Age of Camelot. And I've never played the game, but everyone I talked to who played the game always raved about how good the PvP system was because it left it up into the hands of the players. If you're the top dog faction, the other two factions could choose to ally and bring you some humble pie and bring you back down. You don't try to implement some artificial mechanics that don't work, and you let the player base sort it out. So those are my top 5 design flaws. I'm sure I missed things that were particular or are particular pain points for you. So if I didn't cover yours, leave them in the comments below. And let me know what you'd be interested in hearing me cover my next TaugVlog. There are a couple things that I can think of I can cover. One is the SWTOR free-to-play model, because I have a lot of thoughts about their initial proposed implementation and some serious issues with it. And second thing I could vlog about is talking about why the fanboys don't get it. And if you enjoy this video, please like, share, favorite, subscribe, tell your friends. I'll be happy to do more content like this if people enjoy it and get value out of it. All right, take care, guys. Enjoy the rest of the Olympics. Peace. If you look at what they did and the way they described their work, for example, that it was the largest voiceover project in history, BioWare really totally committed to developing